Thank you. Good afternoon, trustees and our public, anyone online watching us. Today is September the 21st. We will begin our public meeting at 1:30. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Ask trustee to lead us in our opening prayer to include the land acknowledgement. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, we'll begin with some Spirit. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion. Allow us to grow closer as a group and nurture the bonds of community. Fill us with your grace, God, as we make decisions that might affect others. And continue to remind us that all we do here today, all that we accomplish, is for the pursuit of truth, for the greater glory of you, and for the service of humanity. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Now I'll just continue with the land acknowledgement. So we are We are a party to Treaty 6, and as such, we wish to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground for many Indigenous peoples. We recognize the diversity of First Nations who have at one time lived across the territory, as well as the presence of the Métis Nation.
Thank you, Trustee Marco. Mr. Laka, Mr. Bouchard, do we have any public forum? Thank you. We move to the approval of the agenda. We have no additions, the deletions, changes. Okay, I will ask for the approval of the agenda, please. Okay, go ahead.
I move that the board approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. That is the minutes from our August 22nd meeting. Okay, can I have someone make that motion?
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I move that the board approve the minutes of the regular meeting held August 22nd, 2022 as circulated.
Thank you, Trustee Black. Any discussion? I see none. I call the question, please. All in favor? Thank you. Carried. So you have the board priorities and goals attached. Any questions? Okay. And this is for your information. We will move to item number 4 on our agenda. So 4.1, you have the board chair's report. Comment, question? Go ahead.
Chair, in regards to the meeting with the Deputy Minister of Education on an update of the release of updates to the funding manual for 2022-23, is there anything extraordinary to note within those updates?
Okay. I went through the manual, but I can't relate it to operations. Mr. Bouchard or Mr. Laka, anything worthy on the new updates?
There's several new updates, but we weren't prepared. So they haven't brought that information here. We could do that for a subsequent meeting should the board choose, unless Ed wants to mention anything. But
You got anything that stands out?
Not that anything that stands out in particular.
Okay.
Be best in the summary.
Okay. Would you like that brought back sometime or shared? Because I did share that email with trustees. I know there were just a couple of changes in the manual, but I didn't pay much attention to it. It's very operational, that's why.
Yes, if I could request that, I guess, a summary discussion happen at one of our subsequent meetings.
Okay. So, Chair, thank you for operational purposes. All right. Any other question? Okay. We have the superintendent's report attached, and as usual. The highlighted yellows are what we did, our goals and priorities as we work along the year. Any question, comments? Okay, Greg.
Richard, regarding the second bullet of the new SLP, I'm just wondering the SLP's name and what area she will be working. Is there a specific area?
Yes, so it's a he, the new
Sorry?
speech pathologist, his name is Brian. I'm not sure which schools, Lori, do you know which schools he's assigned to?
I don't know which ones, sorry.
Just wondering.
Okay, but we have one right now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
My other question is about the Ukrainian students and Father Leduc. Is Father Leduc the only school that has some new Ukrainian students?
No, we have several students. Lori, how many do we have in the division? Do we have a sense?
I think we maybe have about like 10 or 12.
In the division?
None that I know of in Drayton Valley. But in all of our schools, there seems to be a few, one or two. So it's good, thank you.
Okay. Any more comments? Okay, that's it, Margot.
Just in regards to the student, the Ukrainian students, so I see that there's, welcome and translated information for the staff. Is there an opportunity for information that the schools are sending out to those parents to have translated, welcome letters or documents at the schools? I know it was brought up at one of our school councils, but is there an opportunity that school councils or schools could work together to be able to share information in other languages?
So Michelle Corbet, she is working with Swiss, so settlement workers in schools, and they have a translator. They have an interpreter person that will work directly with schools as needed. But first of all, to connect with community resources, to be able to, if something needs to be translated, any information. There's a variety of services essentially to help these children and families settle into their communities. And so she's working with Swiss, and the schools are working with Swiss. We are also, Michelle is gathering information in regards to the families that are in each school and looking to host an evening, I guess, a session for parents, just to help them to understand Star Catholic, to understand how things are done in Canada, because it is very different than in Ukraine particularly, and in other countries as well. So she's just starting to get a feel for that right now as to how many students do we have, where is the need, what is the need.
Perfect, thank you.
I would just add to that, it really is important to connect them with Swiss, because I mean, if we were to translate our information to every language that we have, we wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
So it's important that we connect them to the community rather than for us to try to translate all our information into all the languages that we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate the previous questions regarding the student population from Ukraine. That is one of my questions on here. So I'm happy to hear the steps that are being taken to support those students. My other questions kind of revolve around a couple of bullets, but they all deal with work towards the new curriculum and working with teachers, assessments, professional development in that order, training materials. To what extent, how much extra time, I guess, has been spent in preparing for this new curriculum, and is it expected to be an ongoing process where everyone is kind of in their place and moving forward now?
So we started the process actually last spring
Yeah.
by bringing teachers to central office for 2 sessions. And then the work continues into this fall. Maybe Lori, you could outline kind of the process this year for that group of teachers.
So in the spring, all of the teachers, K to 3, and so K to 3 met 3 times. And then phys ed and wellness met once. And then over this year, so that was to get them to get their year started so that they could, let's say get to November, December with their planning. And so then they will also meet 2 times mandatory and a 3rd time that will be optional for teachers. And this is basically collaborative planning. So if they would use Backwards by Design essentially to look at, okay, keeping the end in mind, where, what curricular outcomes are we trying to achieve, and planning according to that. And also developing assessments to go along with those lessons and etc.
The only other thing I would add to Lori's comments are that both Lori and Christy, who's the director, are partnering and working with other divisions. Lori was at a meeting at Parkland School Division last week, I believe it was. So we're also tapping into the larger zone for best practices and sharing of resources, etc. So it's not just us in isolation.
There's a really strong move across the province to want to be able to work together because we're all working towards the same goal. And so my colleagues and Christie's level of colleagues in terms of directors or consultants or whatever they call them at the divisions really do want to collaborate and utilize each other's brains and resources, etc., so that we can make the best opportunity for our staff, because it is a very short window for implementation.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, Charlie. Under building effective relationships, you met with the Duke priest and principals regarding the standards for preparing the sacraments. Were there no other priests interested, or?
So in Leduc, just because there are so many schools, they have a meeting between the priest and the principals in one meeting, but in the other communities, those meetings happen as well. So that was actually Claire that was at that meeting with the Leduc principals and the parish priest, but they happen in all of our communities.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just going back to the implementation of the curriculum. Those sessions, I would imagine those are day-long sessions.
Yes.
Question to Mr. Bouchard, then I know the implementation is coming with some funding. Are we tapping into some of those funding to support this work and time that is being done?
So communication around the funding wasn't great, to say the least. We have received some money. I believe it's around $200,000. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, but it's somewhere around that for the duration of the project. That's to include professional learning, professional development, as well as resources. So that's the money that we've been provided by the province for curriculum.
Great, thank you. As long as you are footing some of the bill, that's good. Okay. All right, then we'll, go ahead.
Sorry, just one other question. In section 7, it's the 5th bullet point, reviewing the education funding manual to examine future opportunities for STAR outreach. Just a couple of questions. I'm not sure if this is information that you have at hand, but what is the student enrollment at outreach? Do you know?
So, yeah, so it is in the report that I'll highlight later. Yeah, so the enrollment at the outreach is up. So
21 of them.
I think I thought it was around 19 individual students, or am I thinking of the projected?
No, yeah.
We'll have to.
That's projected.
I apologize. I do remember seeing that now.
Charlie, 33.
It was 30 something.
Yeah, 32.
And then just a follow-up question that, so with the increase, are there future opportunities that have been, I guess, addressed or seen? Like, is there?
The challenge with the outreach is really to really tap into additional students who would almost have to be out of jurisdiction. And some divisions have done that. We haven't done that to the same extent. But anyways, the funding manual for outreach has changed almost every year. So it's just a matter of staying on top of that. I think they're trying to sort through the little nuances that they're hearing from divisions across the province regarding outreaches.
Thank you both for those clarifications. All right, Mr. Barker, have you broken the bank yet? Okay, any comments, clarification, questions?
Just as a point of clarification, there's my regular report, and there's also the fourth quarter financial, and I'll go through the walk through the board through the fourth quarter financial.
Question, is there not a meeting about Father at home? Don't you usually do that every month?
There's a meeting, there's a second meeting at Father Oak Home every 2 weeks, so,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
but I didn't attend the last one because I was going.
Oh, right.
So there's only been one site meeting since the last board meeting, and I wasn't there.
Okay.
So then, if you want to walk us through the fourth quarter, then.
And I say this to the finance committee, so I will project on the screen. Makes it a little easier to see what I'm talking about as I walk through the report. Bring it up a little larger if possible. Honest intent, I don't intentionally use small print. But it seems every time I'm presenting numbers, you fit them all on the page, they get smaller. Again, the format of the report is intended to focus on some of the priorities of the board. So the first charts that are presented deal with the growth and affirming of the Catholic identity as the first priority of the board. What we try and do is translate that into how we assign resources. So there's 2 columns there, the budget versus actual expenditures to date. And then within those 2 columns, we've got a yellow section that's school-based. So that's the budget or the expenditures at the school level. And then the orange or reddish area at the top is centrally where we might do expenditures within those areas. So for the next 3 charts, that's the focus. Looking at the faith life development in terms of the budget versus actuals. We've noted administratively, you will have noted in terms of yourselves that what you're seeing from the schools is they are not spending to the same level that they budgeted for. Central office is very much in tune to that. And so we've identified that as an area of focus in terms of making sure schools are following through with what they intend for expenditures within the area of faith development for students and staff.
Question, is it because we're just coming out of COVID and few programs and faith programs?
A lot of times with student-based ones, they are field trips or retreat orientated. And so over the course of last year, things gradually opened up. And that's my sense, is that not everything that was planned for was anticipatory, that last year would have been all, as it would be traditionally. We didn't quite start out that way, but we finished off the year in a more traditional operation. So I think in some cases, schools that had planned to do certain things weren't able to do them or had to scale them back for the time of year that they normally would do activities with students with regards to faith. What we're hoping is that 22-23 will be more of the traditional operating year, that we aren't dealing with restrictions in terms of our operations because of health crisis. With regards to professional development, a couple of things that we've noted here. almost the reverse. There's a lot budgeted centrally. The majority of centrally, and when I say a lot, graphically it presents a certain way, but when you look at for the division as a whole, in terms of professional development, there's $145,000 there budgeted across the division for professional development. The one thing that's not included is how much we expend on substitute costs with regards to professional development. That substitute costs generally will be our largest costs. For other divisions, it might be transportation, as they have to travel for PD activities. And again, dealing under COVID, we've had restrictions. One of the things that's highlighted over the course of last year is the expenditures with the staff development fund, with the ATA. We're still working through to make sure we've captured everything. We've had to do a lot of corrections in terms of how people are reporting those expenditures to us. But for the most part, that's where we are seeing that under expenditure at the central offices, because we administer that staff development fund. And activities were still fairly restricted over the course of last year. And so we didn't see that same utilization that we would have had 2 years ago or 3 years ago. At the school level, they budgeted for, and I think as things opened up, it exploded more than what they thought they would be doing. So, which is good. Schools are definitely investing in their staff. Priority C, with regards to all students being successful, what we focus on in terms of presentation here is the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit programs and expenditures. Again, centrally, we're fully expending what we had intended to do from a central office perspective. At our school level, we're seeing slightly less than what was planned for. Again, we're highlighting this a bit to make sure that student needs are being met and developed. And given that we're still working a bit with COVID, I'm not sure if all the plans could have been undertaken that were intended when they did the budgets at this point a year and a half ago. So again, we're pretty good, but there might be some room for improvements and just making sure that there's follow through from the schools. In some cases, it might be that they did and it wasn't as expensive as they thought it was going to be. And overall, we're talking about less than $125,000 here across the division and a $50 million budget. So it's the magnitude when you narrow it down. The other one that we look at is specialized learning supports. And here it looks like we didn't just spend, but we spent more. So we have a number of contingency funds with regards to specialized learning supports because students show up that weren't anticipated. And so those contingency funds get allocated to the schools as those students are identified. And so the amount that schools have available to spend actually increases. We don't capture those as central funds because they're just held as a savings account for the piggy bank for schools. So when they need that, because the student has showed up, we have the resources there to help support student needs. In terms of the central office, again, we're pretty well expending what we've intended to. Overall, we're expending over almost $5 million in this area across the division. Looking at our statement of operations, again, our revenues versus expenditures. A couple of items here. One with regards to our provincial funding, we're slightly less in terms of provincial funding than what we had budgeted for, but our enrollment actuals came in less than what we had projected. So we're already we'll see that effect in terms of less revenues than what our actual revenues will be for this year. Federal grants up almost by 25% over our projections. What we've seen is a great deal of success and support from our partners in First Nations reserves in supporting students with needs. And so we got a significant number of students with needs that were approved for Jordan's Principal funding from First Nations. And so that's where that increase in funding is coming from the federal government. It's a flow through, but we recognize those type of resources as federal government resources. Sales and services, up almost 100%, so almost double what we projected. Again, that's, a lot of that has to do with what happens at the school level. And so, again, when budgeting, there's a certain amount of uncertainty with regard to COVID, what they would be able to or not be able to do. When things opened up in March, then field trips could happen. Well, all of those field trip collections become increases in sales and services. So I think it was more that we didn't have a good basis on which to predict what our revenues would be or what the school's revenues would be for those areas. Investment income looks like it's huge, 548%, but we're talking about a small base of $10,000. So again, I will freely admit, and I told this to the finance committee, I am very conservative on investment income because it's really what we earn from any surplus funds. We don't have a lot for surplus funds. Talking to the superintendent, we don't have enough surplus funds that warrants us actually doing investments in GICs because our earnings on what we have on our checking account is more than what the GIC rates are because it's based on prime. So it's better for us to just keep our money there. If we were to, $5, $6, or $10 million of surplus funds that we had available, then we might look at investing opportunities to try and increase that. So that my overall thought is that investment income can be highly volatile. We have a trend that I'm comfortable with, but it's certainly not in the $50,000 or $60,000 range. Even for this year, we've looked at a higher level, but it's at kind of at the peak of where I'm comfortable recommending for budgeting purposes investment income. Other revenues, again, dealing with, for the most part, rental of facilities is what comes into that other revenues line for the most part. Again, we weren't sure what would be allowed, and it wasn't until late that we started opening up our schools for opportunities to rent them out to the community and have those revenue streams. So again, I think we had a very low projection because of the uncertainty of what would be possible. With regards to expenditures, in most cases, whether we're talking instruction, plant operations, and maintenance, most of those are in line. Plant operations and maintenance is a little bit low. We would expect to be, if we were dead on, we'd be at 100%. Operations and maintenance is showing a little low, but we've also not fully expended. The budget had fully expended dollars with regards to infrastructure maintenance and renewal or capital maintenance and renewal. And we haven't spent all of those dollars at this point. So that's where the majority of that underspending, that 13% is coming from. So we budgeted to be at 100%, and facilities isn't quite there yet in terms of getting the projects complete.
Thank you. Within that item, is there the portion that is waiting on approval of an expense that we approved?
No.
So that's not included in this?
No, this would be our regular funding, and it's simply a matter that we scaled back some of the projects. What we were finding with our facilities department coming out of 2 years of COVID, I actually asked them to scale back what they would be doing over the summer months, so that staff could actually take a rest and take some additional breaks and holidays. So, but we're not waiting for approvals with regards to IMR and CMR at this point. CMR, there is an approval process that goes through Treasury, but they're just in, that would have been approved already last fall for this summer. We're going through the process of making a submission application for CMR funding for next year. But the majority of those projects are carryovers. And so we're expecting that those ones are already pre-approved, and there's very few addition because our original request went in for $6 million and we saw 500,000.
And I wonder if Trustee Miller is speaking to the use of reserves that we haven't heard from yet.
The board's approval for use of reserves on that reinvestment, $1.2 million that was, we're still waiting to hear back from. That was on delay at the beginning of summer. I made some inquiries, and the instructions at that point in time was that, we'll just do it. It didn't go through with the submission on the budget for 22-23. It's like, okay, we have some reporting requirements, we need some approvals if we're going to approve this in our financial statement. So my last information is it was going to the minister the last week of August, first week of September, for approvals on that. So we are still waiting for any information, whether that's been approved by the minister at this point. Sorry, I misunderstood you.
No, that's, I wasn't clear in my question.
So one more, yeah, go ahead.
So if I could actually just jump back up to fees under revenues, it's at 69%. That includes school fees, right? What is that to do to?
In particular, I'd have to check with our financial services department on whether there was an overestimate on school fees, whether there's been a number of waivers that have happened at the school level. In terms of our transportation fees, which would also be included in that line, that is higher than what we had budgeted for. So people were definitely returning back to school in the previous year. But I'd have to investigate that more closely in terms of the fees.
It would be great to know if it is that we have that many families unable to pay their fees in any way, or is that, lower enrollment, or is that, loss, not just lower enrollment, but actually loss of students out of division from that. And that would be a fine explanation. But that information would be helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to go back to the expenditures, because we do have two line items, transportation and system administration, both showing us for budget overspent in terms of budgeting. Transportation services, we had underestimated our cost with regards to contract services, so we'll be reviewing that process to make sure we're more aligned with it and better aligned in terms of our projected costs. System administration. We had a few areas. Last year was also an election year, so we had a significant amount of funds expended that weren't normally expended. We are building that into the budget on an annual basis to make sure that that does not impact us in a single year. So again, I think we landed up with just some under expenditures. We also looked at some areas where costs were inappropriately assigned. So there's some evaluations being done with regards to that and follow up. Overall, we're finishing the year very, very positively. I think that shows up in other areas as we move through the report. We were projecting to be at a $1.1 million deficit. I'm not saying that we're going to finish once the audit is complete at a positive, net positive, but we are more positive than what we had budgeted for at this point in time. And that's even looking at reduction in revenues that we're anticipating because of that student enrollment. The second page just provides a little bit more detail on all of those areas that are in the statement of operations, where our costs look like for staffing, supplies and services in a variety of areas. It's the same information, just a little more detail provided. I won't spend a lot of time unless there's a question there.
Go ahead. This is colorful.
This is probably much more interesting. Where our schools are sitting with regards to their individual budgets. And when we talk about a school's decentralized budget, schools, when they get their budget, also that includes how they want to apportion that budget between staffing as well as supplies and services. What this chart represents is after we take staffing, this is the funds that they have available for supplies, services. If they're setting aside funds that they're not going to spend because they're saving for, let's say, replacement of an activity bus or maybe furniture and equipment within the school. But all of that's kind of accounted for on this net of the staffing component. So as you can see, I'm going to sugar coated. We've got some schools where they've got, the yellow bar represents what they have available in terms of their budget. The red is where their actual expenditures landed up. And so we have a number of cases where the red line falls short of what the budget is available and what could be spent. We've identified this as a concern, and we're actually going to try to bring those principles together and try and delve it deep, a little more deeply into what are the reasons for this. Certainly from my perspective is if we've got students that are going without when there's resources available to the school to utilize, why are those decisions being made that way? In other cases, budgets are very close to what their actual expenditures. A couple of instances, Holy Trinity, if I'm going to highlight one, their actual expenditures appear to be slightly over what they had available to them. There is a recovery mechanism, but certainly Senior Ben will be looking at these schools individually and trying to make sure that principals are making, and our administrators have the information at hand to make decisions in a timely fashion. Certainly at this time of the year, it's not a great time to be making expenditure decisions that we've got an entire year with having additional resources for them.
See, Trustee Leonard, yes, your hand up. You
Uh,
worried,
Sure.
you worried, yeah.
Well, this is kind of a speculation question almost, but like with Holy Trinity, would you say that might be due to the fact that they've had more enrollment than they were expecting and then had to spend more?
We've tried to deal with components of that. We have a contingency fund for staffing. And remember, this is historical, so this is last year, and last year they saw an increase in their enrollment. And so in terms of staffing, there was resources to stopgap that. This overall in their budget is relatively minor, and it could be just the timing of certain expenditures coming into play. I'm not concerned if we're recovering that over expenditure out of this year's budget. I don't see it as an issue because it's relatively small. If we were looking at that red line for Holy Trinity be 15-20% of the yellow, then we've got an area of concern and saying, what's happening here? Why are we having some more expenditures? And is there a different issue that we need to address in that circumstance?
And then to like my own question here, I see a lot of the unspent funds. Do you know if that include unpaid bills to the sites?
For the most part, it shouldn't, because we've got it. Our schools don't operate for two months. So all of their expenditures for the previous fiscal year should be in. Any bills that they're getting at the end of August or things like that should be for the next school year. So the result of unpaid bills should not be impacting the surplus or deficit of last year's at our school sites because of the nature of the operations. And wait, just so that you're aware, financial services is quite used to what I call the garbage bag at the end of June, where the request for an invoice, because the vendor's been asking for payment, and there's been a request to the school site for an invoice, but we never received it, we've never seen it, nobody's ever seen it. July 2nd, it suddenly appears as accounts payable. So I think we've got operationally, those things should be fairly limited. Everything after July typically goes to the next school year, will be the next fiscal period.
All right, thank you. Any further questions?
Sorry, I'll leave it there at the decentralized. That's a summary.
Okay, any further questions?
And then the last page of the document deals with our unrestricted net assets. Now, the one thing I want to, and this is where it's the minister's approval of the board's resolution on the reserves and spend those expenditures, is I want to bring in the transfer of those reserves into our financial statements for the 21-22 school year, the last fiscal year. So that this statement reflects those transfers actually occurring, those expenditures actually occurring. So key thing is our projection for accumulated surplus from operations, which is what the province is looking to cap moving forward, is going to become key. So we're at $2.1 million. When I get the audited financial statements, I'll provide you how that compares to our cap. At this point, our cap is 3.92% of our expenditures. But once I've got a definite figure, then we'll look at that. Those unspent funds in schools also become a concern because that accumulated surplus from operations not only includes unrestricted or undesignated surplus funds, but also our operating reserves. Our operating reserves, for the most part, are made up of unspent funds at the school level. So if the schools have unspent funds, it might restrict what the board is able to do or able to carry forward in those areas. So we might be having some very interesting conversations going into the next budget year about school surpluses and unspent funds because of that context. What I want to highlight here is that we're still projecting, based that we've got a positive surplus, that at the end of what I'm anticipating to see on our financial statements is that our unrestricted surplus is still positive. We're still maintaining somewhere around 5 days of operations as unrestricted. Our operating reserves are sitting around $800,000, not as only 50% of what they were at the end of the previous fiscal year, but we're still fiscally, financially quite healthy. But not overly so that, you know, the province needs to claw anything back from Star Catholic.
Not yet.
That's good.
And with that, we're working very hard to maintain that.
Any comments or questions for Ed? For my own comments, I know the unspent funds at school, was it 3 years ago or 2 years ago? Maybe Mr. Bouchard will correct me. Yeah, we went back in there for some money because the board was desperate at that time and wanted to do something. So yeah. So in disguise, it's a blessing sometimes, but sometimes too. Like this board have always made that decision that let's spend what we have on our current student, so we can provide them their needs at this time, not moving off money too long that students are going. Question, Julie? No? Okay. Any further comments for Mr. Laka? Okay. So Mr. Bouchard, something that came, like we all know about the Jordan's principle. It's just a comment of mine, but Alberta is the only province that have really partnership with the First Nation Health Consortium in partnership to assess some of this money to support, especially our Indigenous students that need, say, one-on-one therapies, speech, language, fishing, and all of that. It was interesting. I got to know about that yesterday, even though we know the Jordan's principle, but now this is a partnership in working with jurisdictions and professional services to assess some of that money that is being used so that it's not impacting school boards. Yeah, and I can share more with you after the meeting, which was very, very unique. And the presentation was that money is available, but how to assess it is becoming a listing, including buying like computers, one-on-one tutoring support, again, to bring students that need that. Yeah, the whole work of, we know that other people have a lot of things in it, but how to assess it is the problem. But this is a partnership only in Alberta that they are helping, yeah, jurisdictions and families to do that. Even though it's family oriented and supported, but when they are working with professionals and school of jurisdictions, it makes it easier that the money is going towards the child and the need of the children. Yeah, so I'll share more with you. Good. Any further comments? All right. Thank you, Mr. Laka. So we have money. Good. We will go to number 5, item number 5. Mr. Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first comment I'll make is that there's a real sense of back to normal, I guess I'll say, with the school startup. There's a buzz in schools, students, staff, and parents seem to be happy that we're more back to normal, you know, and that students are able to kind of resume some of the activities that they did prior to COVID. So that's the first thing that I'll say. So things seem to be fairly smooth. In your package, you have a student count from yesterday that was recently updated. Every school, so 10 out of 11 schools are up in enrollment. Only one school is not from last year, and it's a difference of 3 students. But every school is up from what we budgeted in the spring. And what we budget in the spring, those are the numbers we submit to government. So it's a positive story. As a division, we're looking at roughly about 180 students more than last year, which is definitely good news. 2 of the schools that show significant variance are Holy Trinity, where they've had an influx of grade 10s, as well as the outreach. And Trustee DeMarco, you asked about the outreach numbers earlier. I just will point out to trustees that the outreach numbers is 32. Those are 32 sole outreach students. We have way more students that attend and take single courses from the outreach. But those are students that don't belong to any other school in the province, and they only attend that facility. So that is their primary school. We have way more students that take courses at our outreach, but that's primary. Trustee Miller asked a question earlier about the funding manual. There is one addition to the funding manual that's new, and that is if on September 30th, you have a variance of either 2% or 5% thresholds, you're entitled to some mid-year funding. So the first threshold is 2%, the second one is 5%. You can see by looking at our numbers, we're at 4.3%. They used the last year's number. So if on September 30th, we are over 2%, we're entitled to that 2% threshold. That is $1,500 per student. So what that means is whatever that locks in is September 30th. In January, we would receive that amount, which using these numbers is approximately $270,000. The challenge with that is it doesn't come until January, right? So we've put it on our agenda to talk at senior administration tomorrow. We're going to do some consultation with school administration. We may front some of that money. We can, in talking to Ed, we can use that, we can count it as revenue for this year. So we'll make an adjustment to our revenues and we can start allocating that to schools to help offset some of that. What I'll also remind trustees of is that we do set up a contingency of this year, $418,000 to assist schools with enrollment pressures that came in September. So they didn't anticipate it. So this year we were able to help 5 schools hire additional staff. So they were St. Andre's, Sacred Heart, St. Augustine, Holy Trinity, and Notre Dame. So those schools, for example, we had some classes, you know, you can't have a class of kindergarten with 32 kids. You can't have a grade 3 class of, 2 grade 3 classes of 65 students, it's just too big. So we offset some of that. We actually allocated $420,000, $2,000 more than what we had set aside originally. So that is to offset, you know, the unanticipated class size issues that arose in September. So between that contingency, which has been fully allocated, and this new money, we think we'll be in a decent place to support the needs of this enrollment growth as the year goes along. But overall, it's still, I would say, a challenge to try to get the enrollment numbers right. We have to submit them in early January for the next year. And that's a challenge with this funding framework. The last 2 years, because of COVID, we actually overestimated our numbers. So we were very conservative when we submitted our numbers last year, simply because we knew that the minister would likely not institute another hold harmless year. We didn't want to risk, you know, having a clawback after the fact. So That's why we were a little conservative. We didn't know what post-COVID, I don't know, I know we're not out of COVID yet, but I'll call it post-COVID. We didn't know what that would kind of bring. But it looks like a lot of our students have come back. Surprisingly, there's a lot of students, I think, in grade 9, if I recall, that came back. Our numbers in grade 9 are higher. Was it grade 9?
That was great.
Yeah, it's actually our largest growth in the division, which you wouldn't have thought. Anyways, so that is kind of an overview of the enrollment as it stands as of yesterday. So I'd be happy to answer any questions related, but that's just to bring the board up to speed or to provide an update.
Any comments, questions, Mr. Shad? Yeah, go ahead, trustee.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, trustee. Sorry.
Is St. Benedict's ECS numbers higher than Notre Dame's because of the specialized program?
Yes, yeah, they are the community facility for Buff in the city of Leduc.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to clarify that the total enrollment, you sent it in for the end of September, and that's what they base that percentage on, is that correct?
That's correct.
So that could be, we're very close to the 5%.
Well, I don't know that we're gonna go up another, 30 kids in the next 10 days. So we'll probably be at the 2%. It's the 2% or 5, those are the two thresholds. So, if you get to 5%, it's an additional $3,000 per student. So it doubles. It would have been, nice to get the higher number, but I mean, it is what it is.
I was at a school board meeting, and it was 2 more than what's up here just yesterday. That was last night, so.
So yeah, you never know where we'll end up September 30th, but that's where we're at now.
Yeah, go ahead, trustee Miller.
And maybe just to remind for myself, I guess, what this funding is a 4-year cycle? 3-year cycle, and we're going into year.
Yeah, so this is the last year of 3.
So we're looking to come out of year 3 even, and then we start back up at kind of 0. and
No,
go through
it's a
year-
rolling,
It's a rolling.
it's a rolling number. However, the provinces had locked it in for 3 years.
Right,
So I wasn't sure if you were referring to the provincial model or this, but the weighted
The
moving
provincial
average is, 50, 30, 20, 50%, 30%, 20.
Yeah.
And that just keeps rolling.
okay, so next year we're at 50%.
No, what we submit is 50, so you're funded 50% on the current year,
Okay.
30% on last year, 20% 2 years
right,
ago.
okay.
So this enrollment spike, we'll see that increase in the 30% number next year, and then again in the 20% the year after. But we are missing out on 50% of that growth in the current year,
Yes.
right? So there's money that's been left on the table. And I think that's why there is an adjustment to the funding manual to try to offset some of that spike for divisions that do see unanticipated growth. However, it's still not the full amount we would have seen if we would have got our number closer to the actual enrollment.
But again, in all fairness to the province, when this weighted model was coming out and then COVID hit, right? So it distorted everything. But again, now that we are coming back to your question again, trustee Miller, when the field is all known and well examined and processed, would they move back into go into that cycle of 50, 30, 20? Or would they say, no, this is where we'll base everything now and let's move forward? We don't know, but I'm sure it's worth a discussion. I have there. There are no further questions to Richard. Yeah, I'm happy to see that we have some growth. Parents and families are gravitating back into classrooms and into schools, so kids will have socialization and learn. So again, glad to see that we made some provisions, and now we can buffer those and wait for the government if by January they can send us our check. Use the money that we have now and wait for that check. All right. Thank you so much. Okay, Mr. Bouchard will go back to you for the Lacombe update.
So just to bring all trustees in the loop, the Father Lacombe school opening is delayed and the turnover again. So now we're looking at a November 29th date. We're being told that we can have access to the gym November 1st. Fingers crossed. The biggest delays in this project are that the radiant panels on the outside were back ordered. And then the gym floor has been the other issue. So the company that we had purchased the gym, well, not us, but the general contractor purchased the floor from went bankrupt. So we had to find a new company. And so once that new company was found, we purchased wood. It was in Calgary, but we couldn't bring it on site until we got the humidity in the gym to the right level. So those are all factors that are in play. Once we know kind of a firm date and we get a little closer, it doesn't seem like it's that far away, but it still is. And we know that we have a move-in date. We will look at the calendar to look at what we can do to facilitate a move-in before Christmas, I think is what I would advise. We did it once before at Father Leduc, so that we can kind of settle into the school. And then when we return from Christmas, it'll be like kind of the new digs, right? So that's an update on that project, but we keep hoping that we can meet our timelines. That's the latest on that.
So I heard last night that furniture is going to be moving in pretty soon too.
Yeah, so we have to bring the furniture in and they have to, it's called off-gassing, so it has to kind of, get rid of the gas and the chemical smells and all that it has, and that's to meet the LEED's qualifications code. So that is all happening, yes.
And the plumbing bin, I saw. Featured top.
We do need those.
Well, that was good.
And then Mr. Bouchard, do you know if that is enough our business here, but in last bankruptcy, were we impacted or?
No, it didn't affect the project.
Everything that's smoothly okay, yeah. Worried about the money if we get
Yeah.
the money. Okay. All right. Thank you for the updates. Okay. So yeah, we'll do this before we take 10 minutes here. So Thursday, October 13th, here is the proposed agenda for our meeting with His Grace. All right. Any comment? Okay, Mr. Bouchard, go ahead.
Thank you. So in number 2, I'll just draw to the board's attention. These are proposed, that's why it says suggestions from school administration. These do not have to stay in the agenda, but at the admin meeting, as you recall, the principals come to the meeting as well. I said, are there any items that you wish to have on the agenda? Knowing, of course, that would have to go before the board here today for approval. And so you're free to remove any of those items if you wish, but these are the items that they felt they would like to hear from the Archbishop. So I just wanted to provide some context of why they're on this agenda. It was just that it was their input at the last admin meeting.
What is OLBC?
That is Our Lady of Victory.
Okay.
It's the Archdiocesan, one of their 2 camps.
It's been closed for a while.
Yeah, they had to do some renovations. Yeah. And then I think they planned to reopen it, but then COVID was an issue.
I was glad to see it on the agenda.
Because that is support to the schools, right? Those these times. Okay. So agenda looks pretty, and we know it's an hour normally that we're gonna have with His Grace. So and I believe these are the operational questions that came. So we do that. We may have some ideas for our schools to continue the ministry. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I would just add that last year, the trustees asked that the Archbishop, His Grace, speak on, give us a little context on the theme that the division had for the year. So this year, Disciples Through Works. Would you like the Archbishop to provide some comments on that or not?
Just my opinion, I would say no. He was at the opening and he gave a very good context of it. You want to disable this? Or we want to give the opportunity again for some comments? That's just my view. But this is, I'm looking at this very pack for him. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I'm just looking at the last suggestion from school administration and,
Ministry.
no, what can schools do to support our local parish priests so they have the time to be involved in schools? I just don't know if that's more maybe between school administrators and the priests themselves. And also that question, I believe, was asked the last time we met with him. I don't know if it's necessary to go over again. But that's just my thoughts on that one.
I don't think we did have that last.
I could provide some context maybe to why they asked that question. So schools understand that the Archbishop feels that priests need to be in schools. So administrators are looking, is there anything that they can do as administrators to help support that work? And they want to hear from the Archbishop, they want the priest, everybody to hear it at the same time. It's not we're tattling on the priest, it's like, can we do anything to facilitate this work? Because they see the value in it and they just want to be of assistance. That was kind of where it was coming from.
I think that's a very good question to ask, because I think it is important that the priests are more visible in the schools.
Some of them will be here, but they invite you to go.
On that, I was thinking there's something I'd like to see us add to this, and that would be kind of vocations and what can our schools do to promote vocations and what His Grace sees the role of the school with vocations. It's kind of similar to that question, inviting priests in, inviting people of different vocations to kind of give vocation.
Michael, sorry, could you just kind of
Religious
repeat the question again?
vocations,
How would you
right.
phrase it? What can schools do to support?
What can schools do to support
Say, opportunity,
opportunity
for religious vocations coming into the schools, right?
and knowledge and exposure of vocations?
Are we looking specifically for religious vocations?
Yeah, probably more so.
And Michael brings a very valid point. Like when I was in high school, we had St. Thomas Aquinas High School, there were supposed to vocational directors coming into the school. That's your later year, right? Window of getting out. So once they have that sessions and days, sisterhood, brotherhood, missionary praise, when they come in, but the vocational director was the leader, right? And say, Praise and the religious. Okay, thank you, Michael. So Mr. Bouchard, looks clear. We'll send it to His Grace, so he has the answers for now.
Yes, we always send it in advance.
All right. Thank you so much. Can we then take 7 minutes, come back at 3:40 and 2:40? Please. Okay, so let's do it. We'll be back at 2:40. Thank you.